He tore the boarding pass and smirked, thinking he'd made a point. But when the boy's father arrived, the entire terminal learned who really ran the airline. The sharp rip of paper cut through the hum of the terminal like a blade through silence. Heads turned, conversations stopped, and the faint drone of rolling suitcases faded into the background. Malik Torrance froze, staring at the two halves of his boarding pass fluttering toward the floor like wounded birds. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. The gate agent's face, tight, pale, and unyielding, hovered in front of him like an unmovable wall of authority. "This pass doesn't look right," the man said, his tone clipped and dismissive. His name tag gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Carl Benton. He held what was left of the torn paper as if it were contaminated. His brows furrowed, and without even a glance back at the terminal screen, he added sharply, "You people always try something." The words landed like blows. Malik's stomach twisted, but he didn't say a word. His throat felt tight, his fingers numb. He was aware of the stairs now. Passengers frozen mid-step, some whispering, others pretending not to see. The bright screens above the gate glowed with calm efficiency, calling groups to board. But the tension at Gate 47 felt like a storm brewing beneath the glass roof of Halcrest International Airport. The sound of a security guard's shoes echoed from behind. Carl jerked his chin toward Malik, gesturing dismissively. "We've got an issue here," he said. "Kids trying to board with a fake pass." Malik blinked, his pulse hammering in his ears. "It's not fake," he managed to say, his voice steady, though his heart was anything but. "I printed it at the main desk 15 minutes ago." Carl didn't even look at him. "Save it," he said, folding his arms. His tone carried that mix of arrogance and impatience that came from knowing he could get away with it. "You must think people don't check." Malik swallowed hard, forcing down the sting of humiliation. The guard, a tall man with a buzz cut, approached, his expression caught between confusion and discomfort. "Sir," he said to Malik, "do you have your ID?" Malik nodded, fishing out his wallet with slow, deliberate movements, as if afraid any sudden motion would be used against him. His hands trembled slightly. "Here," he said, offering his student ID and his boarding confirmation on his phone. Carl snorted. "Student ID? That's not official." He reached out and grabbed the phone from Malik's hand before the teen could react. "Let me see this." "Sir," Malik began, but Carl was already scrolling through his screen. The passengers behind them shifted uncomfortably, the air thick with silent judgment. Malik could feel the heat creeping up his neck. He wasn't just embarrassed, he was angry, furious even, but the echo of his father's words restrained him. "Keep a low profile. Observe how people treat you when they don't know who you are." He understood now. The gate lights flashed as another group of passengers lined up, watching the exchange. A man in a suit murmured to his companion, "Unbelievable," but didn't intervene. Another shook his head, choosing to look away. Carl shoved the phone back into Malik's hand and stepped closer. "Listen, kid," he said, lowering his voice to a condescending hiss. "You can't just show up with a fancy ticket you printed at home and think you'll slide into first class." His smirk deepened. People notice when something doesn't belong. Malik's hands clenched around his phone. The anger inside him flared, cold, quiet, and sharp. He wanted to shout, to demand why he was being singled out, but his father's advice whispered again in the back of his mind, urging patience, urging clarity. Instead, he unlocked. "Sir," he said evenly, his voice steady now, "I think you just made a big mistake." Carl frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Malik didn't answer immediately. His reflection in the phone's black screen stared back at him, calm on the outside, burning on the inside. He steadied his breathing, capturing everything, the tone, the posture, the arrogance. The security guard shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Benton, maybe we should double-check." Carl cut him off. "No need." "I can tell a forged pass when I see one." Malik raised an eyebrow slightly. "Can you?" he asked softly. There was something about the way he said it, too composed, too measured, that made Carl hesitate. "Watch your tone," the agent snapped, but his voice had lost a fraction of its certainty. The guard's radio crackled. "Security, status check at Gate 47, a voice said through static. The guard hesitated, then replied, We're resolving it. Malik exhaled slowly, his heart thudding against his ribs. Every second stretched longer than the last. The crowd seemed to lean closer. The bright digital clock over the gate ticked mercilessly toward boarding time. Look, Malik said, gesturing toward the system monitor behind the counter. You can scan my confirmation number. It's right here. Carl rolled his eyes. I said it doesn't look right. That's final. But you didn't scan it, Malik replied, his tone still calm, though his patience was thinning. You just tore it. A murmur rippled through the bystanders. A man near the back said quietly, He's right. The agent never scanned it. Carl's jaw tightened. He glanced around, suddenly aware that more than one phone was now recording him. The guard took a small step back, his stance shifting from enforcement to unease. Maybe we should verify before we escalate this, he suggested cautiously. Carl's composure began to crack. Escalate? He's the one making a scene. Malik stared at him, incredulous. I'm standing still, he said quietly. You tore up my pass and called security. How's that a scene? The man's words hit harder than he expected. The people watching murmured again, a wave of uncomfortable realization spreading through them. Carl's lips tightened. You think that phone makes you untouchable? Malik didn't blink. No, he said, his voice low but clear. I just think it makes things visible. A pause, the kind that feels like the air itself is waiting to see who moves first. The gate lights flickered briefly as another boarding announcement played over the intercom. Final call for Flight 108. The normal world went on, but here, at Gate 47, everything had stopped. Carl looked around, realizing too late how many witnesses there were. His authority, once absolute, now teetered on the edge of collapse. He forced a laugh. All right, fine, he said stiffly, reaching under the counter. Let's see what the system says. Malik held his breath as the agent typed in his name, his fingers jittering across the keys. The computer beeped. Carl's face changed, his shoulders stiffened. His eyes darted between the screen and the boy standing in front of him. The guard leaned in. What's it say? Carl swallowed. It says... He hesitated. It says he's confirmed. A murmur spread through the terminal. The sound of disapproval, low, unified, growing louder. Malik felt a flicker of satisfaction, but it was laced with something heavier, sadness. He had expected this reaction. His father had expected it too. Carl fumbled for words. There must have been a system glitch, he said lamely. Malik tilted his head slightly, his expression calm but unreadable. You didn't say that before, he said. His tone was even, almost soft, but it carried weight. A glitch wasn't what you called it. The gate agent's face flushed red. Watch it, he barked, but there was no conviction behind it. The guard sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Mr. Benton, maybe an apology is in order. Carl's jaw flexed, but he didn't speak. The crowd behind Malik was silent now, waiting, recording, remembering. Malik slowly stopped recording, but didn't lower his phone completely. The evidence was there. Everything that mattered had already been captured. For the first time, Carl looked uneasy. The balance had shifted, and he could feel it. Malik wasn't just a passenger anymore. He was a mirror, forcing him to confront the kind of man he had become. But Malik didn't say another word. He stood tall, collected his bag, and looked the man straight in the eyes. Sir, he said, steady as a blade, I think you just made a big mistake. Carl Benton smirked, a short, crooked pull of the mouth that carried more contempt than amusement. He thought he had the situation under control. To him, Malik Torrance was just another kid trying to bluff his way into a seat he didn't deserve. But Malik's calm expression wasn't submission, it was strategy. His father had once told him that composure unsettles those who rely on power to control others. He didn't fully understand that lesson until this moment. The security guard, who had been shifting awkwardly near the counter, finally cleared his throat. Son, I'll need to see your ID, he said, voice low and professional but strained with discomfort. Malik handed it over without hesitation. His hand didn't shake. The phone in his other hand was still recording, the red light blinking silently in the corner of the screen. The lens captured everything, the gate agent's sneer, the crowd's murmurs, the sound of his boarding group being called again as if nothing unusual was happening. Carl took the ID from the guard before he could even look at it. "Student card, huh?" he said mockingly, holding it up to the light as if checking for flaws. "Let me guess, printed this too?" "It's real," Malik replied evenly. His tone was quiet but confident, like someone who had decided to measure his words carefully. "And so is my boarding pass." Carl snorted, a dismissive sound that carried down the boarding line. A few people chuckled nervously. Some passengers exchanged glances but said nothing. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, charged with the unspoken knowledge that something wasn't right here. The gate agent leaned forward slightly, his breath hitting Malik's face. "You can't just show up and pretend to belong in first class," he said with a cruel little grin. "You think people don't notice?" The security guard shifted his stance, clearly uneasy. Malik felt his chest tighten, but not with fear, with something colder. "I didn't pretend anything," he said. "My seat was assigned." For a split second, Carl blinked, thrown off by Malik's steady tone. Then he scoffed, tossing the ID onto the counter with unnecessary force. "Sure it was. Let's see how the system feels about that then." Malik didn't move, didn't flinch. His phone buzzed softly in his palm, a notification sliding across the screen. It was a text from his father. "Are you at the gate yet?" The simple message glowed faintly under the harsh overhead lights. Malik's thumb hovered over the reply button but didn't press it. Something told him to stay silent. Carl reached for the keyboard and started typing. His fingers were quick, his eyes flicking between screens, trying to find something, anything to confirm his suspicion. He muttered to himself as he worked, "This system's been glitchy all morning. Always something wrong when people don't follow the rules." The security guard watched the monitor over his shoulder. Malik kept the camera pointed just high enough to catch both their faces. Then a soft electronic beep broke the tension. The guard frowned at the screen. "Wait," he said, leaning closer. "It says the reservation's valid." Carl paused. "What?" "Look." The guard pointed to the screen. "Malik Torrance, Flight 108, Seat 2A, First Class." Carl's smirk faltered. His confidence cracked, but he tried to recover quickly. "That can't be right," he said, fumbling at the keyboard again. "The system must have updated correctly," the guard interrupted, his voice firmer now. "It's valid, Benton." Carl froze mid-keystroke. The crowd around them began to murmur again, louder this time. Phones lifted into the air as more people started recording. Malik stood still, calm as ever, though his heart raced beneath his composed exterior. "You see?" Malik said quietly. "I told you it was real." Carl turned, the color draining from his face. "There's no way," he muttered, the bravado gone. "It's got to be a glitch." Malik lowered his phone slightly, though the recording still ran. "You didn't say glitch a minute ago," he replied softly, his tone cutting through the noise like a blade. The crowd stirred again, disbelieving, indignant. The tension had shifted. Power had shifted. Carl looked around, realizing the very passengers who'd once watched in silence were now witnesses. The security guard crossed his arms, finally speaking with authority. "Mr. Benton, if the reservation's valid, there's no reason for this kind of behavior." The passenger has every right to board. Carl's mouth opened, then closed. He could feel the eyes on him, the judgment, the scrutiny. The adrenaline that once made him feel in control now turned into panic. "I was just following procedure," he said weakly. "You never know who's trying to sneak through." "I was protecting the flight." "By tearing up a confirmed boarding pass?" the guard asked sharply. Carl's face flushed crimson. I thought you didn't think," Malik interrupted, his tone calm but unmistakably firm. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The truth in his words carried its own weight. For a long moment, no one spoke. The intercom chimed overhead, calling another boarding group. The mundane voice of the announcer clashed with the thick silence between them. Carl fumbled for something, an excuse, a distraction, a way out, but found none. "Look," he said finally, trying to sound authoritative again. "The system must have messed up. It's been having issues all day. I'll fix it." "You didn't need to fix it," Malik said. "You just needed to scan it." The guard suppressed a sigh, the corner of his mouth twitching as if he wanted to say something but thought better of it. The passengers weren't just watching now, they were judging. Several of them shook their heads. One man in a business suit muttered under his breath, "Unbelievable." Carl felt the heat of their stares and stiffened. "This isn't over," he said through gritted teeth, his pride bruised beyond repair. Malik tilted his head slightly, eyes unwavering. "No," he said, voice level and composed. "It isn't." He turned his phone so the camera caught Carl's face in full. The agent's forced composure cracked for a split second, long enough for everyone watching to see. The guard, now standing firmly beside Malik, reached for his radio and reported the incident to the main terminal desk. Malik didn't move. He didn't gloat. He simply watched the man who had tried to humiliate him unravel beneath his own arrogance. Around them, the airport resumed its rhythm. The announcements continued. The conveyor belts hummed and passengers began boarding again. But Gate 47 remained tense, frozen in that strange, fragile space between justice and exposure. Malik knew this wasn't the end of it. The look on Carl Benton's face, pale, tight, and humiliated, wasn't that of a man ready to apologize. It was the look of someone who'd just realized he might have to pay for his actions. But for now, Malik had something better than satisfaction. Proof. The red light on his phone was still blinking, capturing every second, every word, every expression. He lowered it finally, his voice quiet but resolute, each word chosen carefully. "No," he said again, "it isn't." Dennis Crowell's voice cut through the murmuring crowd like the sharp snap of a baton. "What's going on here?" he demanded, stepping between Malik and the now flustered Carl Benton. The supervisor's presence carried authority, the kind that instantly silenced chaos. He was a tall man with iron-gray hair, sleeves rolled just above the wrist, the company badge clipped neatly to his collar. His eyes flicked between Malik's steady posture and Carl's defensive stance. "I heard raised voices." Someone explained. Carl jumped in before anyone else could speak. "This young man presented a suspicious boarding pass and became disruptive when I asked him to step aside," he said quickly, his tone dripping with false professionalism. His chest puffed out as though speaking louder would make his words more believable. "He's recording me without permission, and he's recording because you tore up his boarding pass," the security officer interrupted sharply, holding up Malik's ID. "And the system confirms his reservation. Seat 2A, Flight 108, everything checks out." The air in the terminal seemed to pause. Passengers shifted in their seats, whispering, eyes darting from the officer to Carl. A woman with a stroller shook her head. A middle-aged man near the window muttered, "Unbelievable." The quiet murmur of the gate area turned into a wave of uneasy silence as Dennis slowly turned his attention to Carl. "You tore up his boarding pass?" Dennis asked, voice low but laced with disbelief. Carl's mouth opened, but no words came at first. Then, fumbling, he said, "It looked counterfeit." "I was following standard procedure." "Standard procedure doesn't involve destroying customer documents," Dennis replied sharply, his brow furrowed. "Especially when it's a verified ticket." Malik stood still through it all, his phone steady in his hand, camera still recording. He could feel every eye on him, the weight of judgment and curiosity pressing against his shoulders. But beneath his calm exterior, his mind was racing. His father's words echoed in his head. "Observe how people treat you when they don't know who you are." Dennis turned to Malik. "May I see your phone?" he asked in a calmer tone, though his jaw remained tight. Malik hesitated for a moment, sensing that this man wasn't here to intimidate him but to understand. Without a word, he unlocked the screen and handed it over, keeping the recording visible. The video played back clearly. Carl's dismissive tone, the sound of paper tearing, the audible remark that had made the crowd shift in discomfort. The evidence was undeniable. The supervisor's expression darkened as he listened. When the final few seconds ended, Dennis handed the phone back carefully. "I've heard enough." His voice was steady now, but laced with controlled anger. "Mr. Benton, this is completely unacceptable." Carl straightened, trying to salvage some dignity. "Sir, if I may—" "No, you may not." Dennis's tone left no room for argument. "You tore up a verified boarding pass, humiliated a passenger in front of witnesses, and now you're trying to justify it with excuses?" Carl's face reddened. He glanced at the surrounding passengers, all of whom were now openly recording or whispering. "There must have been a system glitch," he muttered. "Maybe the barcode didn't match." Malik's calm voice broke through, his words steady but cutting. "You didn't say glitch a minute ago." The statement hung in the air, quiet but powerful. Even the soft hum of the intercom couldn't fill the silence that followed. Dennis turned sharply toward Carl, his eyes narrowing. The guard shifted awkwardly, glancing between the two men, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. Carl's lips pressed into a tight line. "You think recording me changes anything?" He finally snapped, his tone brittle with wounded pride. "You think this will make you right?" Malik didn't flinch. He lifted his gaze and met Carl's eyes with unshaken composure. His pulse raced beneath his calm exterior, but his voice stayed firm. "No," he said. "But it's not me you'll be explaining yourself to." Gasps rippled across the gate area. Even Dennis froze for a split second, the authority in his face giving way to curiosity. The security guard looked at Malik as if seeing him for the first time, not just as a teenager, but as someone who understood the weight of power and patience. Carl blinked, his bluster faltering. "What's that supposed to mean?" he demanded, though his tone lacked its earlier confidence. Before Malik could respond, a soft chime echoed from the overhead speakers. The airport intercom crackled, followed by a calm but urgent voice. "Attention all Gate 47 personnel. Please report to the private operations channel immediately." Dennis frowned. "That's unusual," he muttered under his breath. "That code's rarely used unless—" He stopped himself, glancing toward the security officer. The man gave a small nod and stepped aside to take the radio call. Passengers whispered again, sensing that something more was brewing beneath the surface. Malik's phone buzzed in his hand. He glanced down to see a new text from his father flash across the screen. "Stay where you are, don't board yet." The words sent a chill down his spine, not out of fear, but because of the precision in their timing. His father never sent unnecessary messages, and Malik knew from experience that when Dr. Adrian Torrance said, "Stay," it meant something was already in motion. Carl, meanwhile, looked restless, like a man trapped under a spotlight. "Sir," he said to Dennis, trying to redirect attention, "shouldn't we move this along?" "He's delaying boarding." Dennis didn't even look at him. His eyes were fixed on Malik, studying the boy's expression, as if searching for something hidden. "I think we're the ones who need to pause," he said evenly. "Something tells me this situation is bigger than it appears." Malik didn't respond, but a small, knowing flicker passed through his eyes. His phone was still in his grip, camera still rolling, the digital lens catching every flicker of tension in the air. Around him, strangers whispered his name, the name they'd overheard the officer read aloud. "Torrance," one man whispered to another. "I've heard that name before." But before anyone could piece it together, Dennis's earpiece buzzed. He turned away, listening intently. Whatever he heard made him straighten immediately. He turned back toward Carl, his face unreadable but his tone cool as ice. "Mr. Benton," he said slowly, "you're going to step aside." Carl hesitated, but the sharp authority in Dennis's voice left no room for pride. He moved aside stiffly, muttering under his breath. The crowd's eyes followed him, their judgment clear. Dennis exhaled, rubbing his temple. "Mr. Torrance," he said carefully, addressing Malik for the first time by name, "I'm going to need you to wait here for a few minutes." Malik nodded once, the faintest trace of a smile ghosting across his lips. His father's text still glowed on the screen, the meaning behind it becoming clearer with every passing second. He didn't know exactly what was about to happen, but he knew one thing for certain. This was far from over. And as the murmurs swelled again, and Carl fidgeted with the frayed edge of his uniform, Malik's calm voice cut through the tension one last time. "No," he said quietly, eyes never leaving Carl. "But it's not me you'll be explaining yourself to." The murmurs had barely begun to fade when the air around Gate 47 shifted again, an almost tangible ripple of confusion, curiosity, and growing unease. The intercom's last call still hung faintly in the air when two men in tailored gray suits emerged from the executive corridor, walking with quiet precision and purpose. Their silver badges gleamed beneath the harsh terminal lights, the unmistakable insignia of Aurora Sky Airlines shining on their lapels. They didn't look like regular airport staff. Their pace was deliberate, their expressions controlled, their presence commanding enough to make passengers instinctively move aside. Even before they reached the gate, Dennis Crowell straightened his posture, sensing that this was not a routine visit. Carl Benton, still standing stiffly near the desk, frowned in confusion but tried to appear composed. The security officer who had supported Malik earlier stepped subtly to the side, clearly aware that whatever this was, it was now above his pay grade. The taller of the two men, a sharp-featured executive with a calm, unreadable expression, spoke first. "Gate 47. His voice carried authority without raising volume. "Yes, sir," Dennis replied quickly, trying to recover his composure. "There was a situation with a passenger's boarding pass. We were just resolving it." The man's eyes flicked toward Malik, who stood quietly near the seating area, phone still in hand. Then his expression softened slightly. "Malik," he said, in a tone that mixed professionalism with familiarity. Carl blinked. You know him?" The executive, Harlan Pierce, nodded once, turning to the stunned agent. "Yes," he said evenly. "I know him very well." For the first time since the incident began, Malik allowed a faint flicker of recognition to cross his face. "Mr. Pierce," he greeted, his voice calm and measured. Pierce approached him with a firm but reassuring nod. "Your father's on his way," he said softly. The words meant only for Malik, but loud enough that the nearby passengers caught them. The effect was instant. The whispering in the gate area reignited, spreading like wildfire through the crowd. His father? Who's his father? The murmurs became waves of speculation, every onlooker sensing something far more significant was about to unfold. Dennis's brow furrowed. "His father?" he asked slowly, glancing between the boy and the executive. "Mr. Pierce, what exactly is going on?" Pierce turned toward him, his tone professional but unyielding. "Dr. Adrian Torrance, Chief Executive Officer of Aurora Sky Airlines, requested that this gate remain secure until his arrival." The words hit like a thunderclap. Carl's expression went blank, his jaw slackening as if his mind was trying and failing to process what he'd just heard. Dennis froze mid-breath, his professional demeanor cracking under the sudden realization of who they were dealing with. The passengers, already on edge, began buzzing with excitement. Phones were raised again, some discreetly, others openly, recording every reaction, every tremor of realization crossing Carl's pale face. "Wait," Carl stammered, his voice barely audible. "The Dr. Torrance?" "As in, the CEO?" Pierce didn't answer directly. He didn't need to. His silence was confirmation enough. Malik said nothing, standing tall but still, watching as the world around him recalibrated. The humiliation he'd endured only minutes earlier now sat suspended in the air like a storm about to break. He could feel the eyes of dozens on him, not as judgment now, but as realization, every witness silently piecing together the true scale of the mistake that had just been made. Outside the terminal's tall glass windows, movement caught several eyes. A sleek black sedan pulling into the executive drop-off lane. The car's reflective surface shimmered beneath the bright airport floodlights. It didn't stop at the main entrance like the others. It parked directly near the private access walkway reserved for senior corporate personnel. "Is that him?" one man near the window whispered. "Has to be," another replied, raising his phone for a better angle. Inside, the tension built like air before a thunderstorm. The security officer exhaled slowly, shaking his head as if he couldn't believe the turn of events. "Sir," he said quietly to Malik, "I think your dad's here." Carl, now visibly sweating, stumbled over his words. I This must be a misunderstanding. I was just trying to do my job. Dennis cut him off sharply. Enough. His tone carried the clipped edge of both anger and disbelief. You've done quite enough, Carl. Pierce gave Malik a small, steadying nod before turning back to Dennis. Dr. Torrance asked that no one leave or enter this gate until he arrives. Security detail will be here shortly to ensure compliance. Dennis nodded quickly. Understood. His voice was stiff but respectful. He straightened his tie and shot Carl a glare that spoke volumes. The whispers among the passengers swelled into quiet astonishment. Someone muttered, "That's the CEO's son?" While another whispered, "The gate agent tore his ticket?" The gravity of the moment was spreading through the terminal like an unstoppable current. Malik, for his part, stayed silent. His father's lessons on composure echoed in his mind. Control the silence before you control the words. Every instinct told him to hold his ground, to let the truth unfold without force. Through the glass, the sedan's rear door opened. A driver in a dark uniform stepped out, walking briskly around to the passenger side. For a moment, the entire terminal seemed to hold its breath. Carl's eyes darted toward the entrance, panic creeping in around the edges of his voice. He can't possibly be coming here, right? I mean, this is just a gate issue, not... Pierce shot him a look so cold that it silenced him mid-sentence. You made it more than a gate issue the moment you tore up that pass, he said quietly. Now it's an executive issue. Dennis didn't speak. His jaw was tight, his expression unreadable, but the muscle in his temple twitched. The passengers leaned forward, sensing that they were witnessing something far larger than an argument. Cameras continued rolling, flashes blinking faintly from different angles. Malik's phone buzzed once again, a notification sliding across the screen. But this time he didn't check it. His gaze remained fixed on the glass wall and the car beyond it, the black shape cutting a line of shadow through the bright light of the tarmac. Carl shifted nervously, trying to stand upright, but his knees betrayed him. "Sir," he whispered hoarsely to Dennis, "maybe I should step away before—" Dennis didn't even look at him. "You'll stay right where you are," he said firmly. "You started this. You'll see how it ends." The terminal was now silent except for the rhythmic click of approaching footsteps. Slow, deliberate, echoing from the polished floors of the executive entrance. Pierce adjusted his tie and said under his breath, "He's coming through now." The security guard, who had maintained professional composure until this moment, gave a small exhale of awe. He glanced at Malik, then toward the approaching figure beyond the glass. "Sir, I think your dad's here." Malik turned slightly toward him, his voice low but steady. "Then let's see if anyone still thinks my pass was fake." The air inside Gate 47 thickened with tension the moment Dr. Adrian Torrance entered. The sliding glass doors parted as if the terminal itself recognized authority. He moved with composed precision, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a charcoal suit that seemed to absorb the glare of the terminal lights. His expression was calm, unreadable, but every step he took carried weight. Passengers fell silent, phones lifted mid-air, recording. Even the hum of overhead announcements seemed to fade under the quiet authority of his presence. Carl Benton froze behind the counter, his face pale and damp with sweat. The torn fragments of Malik's boarding pass still lay on the floor, stark against the polished tiles. Dennis, the supervisor, shifted uneasily beside him, his clipboard trembling slightly in his hand. Adrian's gaze landed on Carl with surgical precision. "Is this the employee who tore my son's boarding pass?" His tone was level, calm, almost gentle, but each syllable struck like a hammer. Carl stammered. "Sir, I didn't mean any disrespect. It was just—" He gestured helplessly toward Malik, who stood quietly beside his father's assistant, Harlan Pierce. "There were security concerns, you see. We get all kinds of fake passes." Adrian didn't blink. "Fake," he repeated softly. The word hung in the air, stripped of all emotion. Then his eyes moved to Dennis. "Supervisor, is this how Aurora Sky greets its passengers?" Dennis swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. "Mr. Torrance, I assure you, this is a misunderstanding. We'll handle it internally. I'll personally apologize to your son and—" Adrian raised one hand, stopping him mid-sentence. The motion was calm, but final. Save that for the board meeting tomorrow. A ripple of murmurs passed through the onlookers. Carl's eyes widened in horror. Board meeting? He repeated, voice cracking. Sir, please, I didn't know. Adrian's expression didn't change. That's the problem, he said, his voice low but firm. You didn't need to know who he was to treat him with basic respect. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant rolling of suitcase wheels and the faint echo of camera shutters. Passengers watched as the CEO of Aurora Sky Airlines stood just feet from his son, the company's insignia gleaming on his lapel like a seal of judgment. Malik stayed silent. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing against him, the same gait that had humiliated him now witnessing something extraordinary. His father's calm presence radiated command without aggression. There was no shouting, no theatrics, just quiet control. Carl shifted his weight nervously, the knot of his tie hanging loose. Sir, I thought the ticket was suspicious, he tried again. You see, it was printed differently, and I was just following protocol. Adrian turned his attention back to him. Protocol is not an excuse for prejudice, he said. If every decision you make is based on suspicion instead of judgment, then you're not ensuring safety. You're ensuring shame. The statement hit Carl like a physical blow. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Dennis looked down at his clipboard, eyes darting nervously toward the reporters who were now recording openly. Adrian then turned to Malik, his voice softening. Did you capture everything? Malik nodded. Every word, he said, holding up his phone. Adrian nodded once, approvingly. Then the record is clear. The crowd seemed to hold its breath. The father and son stood side by side, the quiet strength between them speaking louder than any outburst. Adrian's presence filled the space, not just as a CEO, but as a father reclaiming his son's dignity. Carl's face reddened as he looked from one man to the other. Mr. Torrance, he said weakly, I truly didn't mean any harm. Dennis stepped forward, his tone subdued. Mr. Torrance, corporate HR will be notified immediately. We'll review the incident formally and ensure disciplinary action is taken. Adrian's eyes flicked to him briefly. No need, he said. His voice was steady, unhurried. HR reports to me. The words hit like thunder. Gasps rippled through the watching crowd. Carl looked stricken, his fingers trembling as they gripped the edge of the counter. Adrian continued, his voice unwavering. This isn't just about a torn pass. It's about what this airline represents and what it refuses to tolerate. The room went still. Even the air seemed to pause, waiting for what would come next. Carl's lower lip trembled. He looked at Dennis for help, but Dennis only stood frozen, his posture stiff and formal. Pierce shifted slightly, maintaining his quiet presence by Malik's side, his face impassive but his eyes sharp. Adrian took a slow breath and stepped closer to the counter, his reflection visible in the glossy surface. Do you know what Aurora Sky was founded on, Mr. Benton? He asked calmly. It wasn't just technology or luxury. It was trust. My father built this airline because he believed that travel brings people together. Every passenger, every worker, no matter who they are, deserves dignity. He paused, letting the silence stretch. Then he added quietly, and today, you failed that mission. Carl's shoulders sagged, defeat and fear written across his face. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but words failed him. The cameras caught every second. A journalist at the back whispered into a mic, Breaking news from Aurora Sky Terminal. CEO Adrian Torrance personally addresses staff misconduct involving his own son. Malik shifted slightly, discomfort flickering in his chest. He hadn't wanted it to explode like this. But as he looked at his father, steady, firm, unshaken, he realized something. This wasn't revenge. It was restoration. Adrian turned to Dennis again. You will file a full report, he said. Include every name, every witness, and every piece of footage. I want transparency. Yes, sir, Dennis said quickly, bowing his head. Adrian's gaze moved back to Carl. You're suspended pending review. You'll be contacted by corporate compliance before the end of the day. Carl's voice cracked. Sir, please, my job. Adrian's tone remained level. Your job isn't being taken from you because of who my son is. It's being reviewed because of what you chose to do. Carl's head dropped. His breathing came shallow and uneven. Adrian turned away then, the conversation over in his eyes. He placed a gentle hand on Malik's shoulder, guiding him toward the private lounge entrance. But before they stepped away, Malik glanced back at the counter. Carl stood frozen, surrounded by silence and whispers. Reporters were already spreading the story, phones flashing, microphones lifted. Pierce followed a few steps behind them as Adrian and Malik reached the glass door leading to the executive passage. Outside, the black car still waited, gleaming under the afternoon sun. Malik spoke softly. "You didn't yell at him." Adrian gave a faint smile. "I didn't need to." His gaze drifted toward the crowd still gathered at Gate 47. When people see power used quietly, it leaves a deeper mark. Malik nodded slowly. The noise of the terminal began to fade behind them, replaced by the muffled hum of the corridor. As they passed through security clearance, an employee opened the door and said respectfully, "Welcome back, Dr. Torrance. Your flight is ready whenever you are." Adrian inclined his head slightly, but his eyes lingered on his son. "You handled yourself well," he said. "You didn't let anger lead." Malik exhaled. "I just wanted to prove I wasn't lying." "And you did," Adrian said. "But sometimes the truth doesn't need defending. It just needs to be revealed." For a moment, Malik didn't respond. He looked through the glass at the sea of faces still watching from the terminal. The people who had laughed, doubted, whispered. Now they watched in silence, some ashamed, others awed. Pierce approached from behind, lowering his voice. "Sir, the media is already circulating the footage. Should I have communications issue a statement?" Adrian shook his head slightly. "No," he said. "Let the story speak for itself." The three men continued toward the private gate. Malik's steps slowed, his heart steady now. The weight that had pressed on him since the confrontation finally lifted. The humiliation had been public, but so was the justice. And as they reached the door to the private jetway, Adrian glanced back one final time, his voice firm and clear enough for those still watching through the glass to hear, "This isn't just about a torn pass. It's about what this airline represents and what it refuses to tolerate." The hum of the terminal still hadn't settled. Around Gate 47, airport officials hurried to disperse the curious crowd that had gathered, but the whispers kept circling like restless wind. Cameras were still rolling. Reporters murmured into microphones. And somewhere in the chaos, Malik sat beside his father in the quiet alcove of the executive lounge, trying to make sense of what had just unfolded. Dr. Adrian Torrance sat upright, his posture precise and composed as ever. The sheen of authority still clung to him, but his face was unreadable now, focused, calculating. In front of them, Malik's phone replayed the video he had recorded earlier, the confrontation looping back to the moment Carl had torn his boarding pass. The faint noise from outside, the beeping carts, the calls for delayed flights, faded into insignificance. Here, in this small corner of stillness, something new was forming. "Go back 10 seconds, Adrian said quietly. Malik hesitated, then dragged the slider back. The phone screen flickered as the footage rewound. Carl's nervous voice replayed, the scanner's faint chirp sounding again. "Pause there." Malik stopped it just as Carl's hand hovered over the scanner. The faint glow of the device reflected off the glass counter, displaying something neither of them had noticed before. A small message, barely visible for half a second, flashed across the scanner's screen. Adrian leaned closer. "Zoom in." Malik pinched the screen, and the image sharpened just enough for the letters to become legible. The text read, "Code 71, flagged by internal ID check." Malik frowned. What does that mean? Adrian didn't answer right away. His eyes narrowed, his breathing steady but deliberate. He had seen that message before, but never in a situation like this. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than usual, almost to himself. "That shouldn't happen." Pierce, standing near the window, turned at the tone. "Sir?" Adrian straightened slightly. "That code. It's used only in the operations system. It doesn't appear for passengers. It's an internal marker for compromised credentials." Malik blinked. "Compromised? Like fake?" "No." Adrian's jaw tightened. Like someone marked your name on purpose. Before Malik could process that, Dennis, the supervisor who had stayed close by, still nervous from the earlier confrontation, stepped forward cautiously. "Sir, I overheard. Did you say Code 71? Adrian nodded once. "You know what it means?" Dennis swallowed, his voice low. "It's an administrative flag. Only management or IT can use it. Gate staff don't even have access to the override system that triggers that code." Adrian's expression darkened. His words were clipped now, cold as steel. "Then who did?" A tense silence filled the lounge. The sound of distant chatter from the terminal felt muted under the weight of that question. Pierce shifted his stance. "Sir," he said carefully, "there were rumors last week about a breach in the ticketing servers. Someone tried to reroute passenger verification data. The tech division brushed it off as a glitch." Adrian turned his full attention toward him. "I remember that memo. It was buried under minor incident reports." He paused, his gaze moving from Pierce to Malik, then back to the terminal beyond the glass wall. "But this isn't a glitch. Someone accessed internal systems and deliberately flagged a name. My son's name." Malik's heart thudded against his ribs. The thought twisted in his mind. Someone inside Aurora Sky, his father's own company, had intentionally marked him as suspicious. His throat felt dry. "Why would anyone do that?" he asked quietly. Adrian didn't respond at first. He sat back, thinking, his fingers pressed lightly together. "Every system has traces," he murmured. "If it was internal sabotage, it'll leave a trail in the audit logs." Dennis hesitated. "Sir, those logs are encrypted, only top-tier access." "Which I have," Adrian interrupted, his tone curt but calm. "And as of now, this investigation becomes internal executive priority." He stood, his height casting a long shadow across the polished floor. "Pierce, contact Operations Control. I want the system timestamp for that specific boarding pass scan. Use the terminal ID." "Yes, sir." Pierce immediately moved to a side desk, pulling out his phone and making the call. Adrian looked down at Malik, who still held the phone. "Keep that video secure," he said. "No uploads, no sharing. This isn't about publicity anymore." Malik nodded slowly. "I understand." Minutes passed, the tension building like static before a storm. Outside, officers directed the remaining crowd away, though flashes from cameras still caught on the glass. Pierce returned quickly, his expression troubled. "Sir," he said in a low voice, "the timestamp logs are missing." Adrian's head turned sharply. "Missing?" "Yes. The scan ID from Gate 47 was erased an hour ago." Malik looked up. "You mean deleted?" Pierce shook his head. "No, sir. Overwritten. Someone replaced the log with a blank entry like it never existed." Adrian exhaled through his nose, his composure steady but his eyes now glinting with controlled fury. "Then we have confirmation," he said. "This wasn't an accident." Dennis looked visibly shaken. "Sir, that kind of data edit requires administrative credentials. We're talking executive clearance level, at least division access." Adrian's gaze flicked to the glass window overlooking the terminal, where the Aurora Sky insignia gleamed above the gates. "Then we may be dealing with someone much higher than a gate agent." Malik leaned forward, his voice hesitant. "Dad, you think someone wanted this to happen to me? To embarrass you?" Adrian looked at him, and for a moment the hardness in his eyes softened. "I think someone wanted to send a message," he said quietly, "and they used you to deliver it." The realization hit Malik like ice. He felt anger, but beneath it, fear. Someone inside his father's company, the very empire built on precision and integrity, had twisted the system to target him. Pierce's phone buzzed again. He checked it quickly and frowned. "Sir, Operations Control just reported a new issue. Someone's remotely locking admin access to the internal ticket system. They said it's undergoing emergency maintenance, but no such order was issued." Adrian's voice dropped an octave. "They're covering their tracks." He turned to Dennis. "Get me the name of whoever initiated that maintenance notice." Dennis hurried to his terminal at the lounge desk, typing quickly. The seconds stretched painfully, then his face drained of color. "Sir," he said, voice trembling, "the request came from someone in corporate infrastructure." The ID reads, E. Mathers. Pierce stiffened. Elliot Mathers? He was the systems director before you reassigned him last quarter. Adrian nodded slowly, his face unreadable now. He wasn't pleased about that reassignment, he murmured. Claimed I'd humiliated him in front of the board. Dennis looked up. Sir, he still has clearance from his old credentials if they were never fully revoked. Then he's the one who set the flag, Adrian said firmly. And he thought he could hide behind a system loophole. Malik clenched his fists. So he tried to get back at you. Through me? Adrian's jaw tightened. Revenge doesn't always come with a weapon, Malik. Sometimes it comes with a code. For a long moment, the room was silent. Then Adrian reached for his phone. Pierce, notify corporate security. Lock down the system's access points. No one touches the server without my authorization. Yes, sir. Dennis, Adrian added, escort Carl and the other staff into a private room. No further questioning until this is resolved. Dennis nodded, leaving quickly. Adrian turned to Malik. You see why I built Aurora Sky the way I did? His voice was calm again, though a shadow of anger lingered. We fly higher not because we're untouchable, but because every threat must be faced before it grows wings. Malik nodded slowly. So what happens now? Adrian looked down at the phone screen again, replaying the flickering image of the words, Code 71, then locking the device. His reflection in the glass was sharp, decisive. Now, he said, we follow the trail. Pierce returned moments later, whispering urgently, Sir, security confirms Mather's keycard was used to access the East Data Center 30 minutes ago. Adrian straightened. Then he's still in the building. Pierce nodded. Most likely, the East Data Center connects to the operations hub through the terminal's lower level. Adrian's eyes hardened. Then we're not leaving yet. He placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder. Malik felt the resolve in that gesture, the quiet certainty that his father wasn't just a CEO at that moment, but a man protecting both his family and his company. The hum of the airport outside carried on, oblivious to the undercurrent of danger now rippling through its walls. Somewhere below them, a former executive with access to the heart of Aurora Sky's systems was trying to erase his tracks. Adrian glanced once more toward the window, where the fading sunlight cast a soft reflection over the tarmac. Then, in a tone that brooked no argument, he said, We're not leaving yet. We're going to find out who did this, and why within minutes, Adrian ordered the gate closed. The loud clack of the metal barrier sliding into place cut through the restless hum of travelers like a final verdict. Passengers looked around in confusion, clutching their carry-ons and murmuring to one another as the announcement echoed through the terminal speakers. Flight 108 is temporarily delayed for executive review. Please remain in the boarding area. The sterile brightness of the gate suddenly felt colder, heavier. Even the usual beeping of scanners had gone silent, replaced by whispers and uneasy glances between strangers. Adrian's expression was unreadable as he turned sharply toward the operations desk behind the gate. His assistant, Pierce, followed with quick steps, his earpiece already buzzing with incoming alerts from corporate channels. Malik, standing a few feet away, hesitated. His chest tightened, not from fear but from something harder to define. He could sense his father's intensity, the way his calm always hid calculation. Adrian didn't raise his voice, didn't command attention, yet the entire gate area seemed to bend around him like a storm quietly building strength. Carl, the gate agent who had torn Malik's boarding pass earlier, stood pale and rigid near the podium. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to smooth his uniform jacket. Sir, I swear, I didn't do anything beyond my job, he said, voice cracking under the weight of his own nerves. Adrian didn't even turn to him. His focus was locked on the terminal computer, his fingers flying across the keys in swift, deliberate motions. The blue glow of the monitor reflected in his eyes as lines of data scrolled rapidly by. I know you didn't code that alert, he said flatly, his tone cutting through the noise like a scalpel. But you didn't question it either. That's the real failure. Carl's mouth opened, then closed. The word stung more than a direct accusation. He looked down, shame prickling his skin. Pierce leaned closer to the monitor, murmuring under his breath. Sir, the log shows multiple edits. Seat assignment, security flag, clearance level. Someone tagged the name under an identity checklist. Adrian's brows furrowed. He typed faster, navigating through several encrypted fields. Whoever did this had clearance beyond a standard gate agent, he muttered. They knew exactly how to hide their tracks. Malik stepped closer, curiosity and unease twisting together. Dad, what are you looking for? Adrian didn't answer immediately. His eyes narrowed as he opened the final layer of internal logs. Then he stopped. One entry, time-stamped 30 minutes before Malik arrived, blinked at the top of the list. It showed the exact ticket number, his son's, altered by a user ID labeled M. Draylen. Pierce leaned closer, his expression tightening. Sir, that's Martin Draylen, head of ticketing security. For the first time, Adrian's hand stilled on the keyboard. His gaze hardened as he read the name again, the muscles in his jaw tightening. Then he just made a career-ending mistake. The air felt heavier now. Pierce stepped back, glancing around as if the walls themselves might be listening. Carl, wide-eyed, whispered, Sir, you think Draylen's behind this? Adrian finally turned to face him. I think Draylen's part of something that doesn't belong in this airline. His voice carried no anger, just certainty, the kind that made everyone else fall silent. He looked to Malik, whose brow was furrowed with confusion and a hint of worry. Son, I need you to stay here with Pierce. Malik frowned. Where are you going? Adrian adjusted his tie, his every movement controlled, precise. To see how deep this goes. His gaze flicked toward the frosted glass doors leading to the VIP and corporate offices, tucked behind the security checkpoint. Beyond that door, the quiet veneer of the airport gave way to the unseen machinery of the company, the systems, the executives, the ones who thought their actions went unnoticed. Malik wanted to protest, but something in his father's expression stopped him. It wasn't just authority, it was concern, hidden behind calm professionalism. The teenager swallowed hard. Be careful, he said softly. Adrian gave him a steady look, a silent promise. Always. Then he turned and walked toward the restricted area, his steps echoing across the polished floor. Passengers parted instinctively as he passed, sensing authority without understanding it. The security team by the doors straightened as he approached. One guard, recognizing him, immediately keyed in a code to unlock the access gate. Adrian didn't slow down. As the doors shut behind him, Malik exhaled slowly, tension coiling inside his chest. Pierce put a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Your father knows what he's doing, he said quietly. But the look in his eyes wasn't confidence. It was worry. Meanwhile, behind the security door, Adrian's pace remained brisk. The corridor was narrow and lined with metal panels that reflected the overhead lights. Cameras tracked his movement, but he ignored them. He reached the end of the hallway and entered the executive wing, where only high-level staff were allowed. His badge gave him access to nearly every room in the building. When he entered the small control center overlooking the flight operations board, two technicians glanced up in surprise. Mr. Cole? One stammered. We didn't expect... The technician obeyed instantly, hands trembling as he navigated through the secure system. Adrian stood behind him, eyes fixed on the screen as the data appeared line by line. There it was again, a sequence showing Draylen accessing the security clearance matrix, running a manual flag under identity verification protocols, and then deleting the record from the public log. It wasn't standard procedure. It was a deliberate targeting. Where is he now? Adrian asked. Conference room 3, the other technician replied nervously. He's meeting with, Director Vaughn. Adrian's eyes darkened slightly. Vaughn was head of corporate risk, a man known for avoiding trouble, not causing it. If he was meeting with Draylen, it meant either damage control or collusion. Adrian turned sharply toward the exit. Lock down this system. Nobody in, nobody out. Yes, sir. He moved down the corridor again, his shoes clicking steadily on the tile floor. But as he neared the corner leading to the conference wing, a faint movement caught his attention. A reflection in the glass panel ahead. Someone had stepped back just out of sight. Adrian paused, his instincts sharpened from years of corporate warfare that felt more like espionage than business. If you're going to follow me, he said evenly, without turning around. At least do it properly. A young man in a dark suit hesitated, then stepped into view. It was Nolan, one of the lower-level analysts from the Internal Audit Department. "Sir, I wasn't following you. I just heard there was a flag in the system involving your son." Adrian studied him for a long moment. "And?" Nolan swallowed. "I saw something odd this morning." Draylen requested off-site clearance for a private server check. It wasn't logged in the main system. He said it was for a VIP review, but the code he used— Adrian raised an eyebrow. "Wasn't company issued?" Nolan nodded quickly. "Exactly. I thought maybe he was just patching the system, but now—" Adrian's voice dropped slightly. "Now it looks like he was setting up a trap." Nolan nodded again, his expression pale. Adrian glanced toward the corridor leading to conference room 3. The frosted glass door at the end flickered with light, shadows moving inside, voices faintly audible through the wall. He turned back to Nolan. "Go back to your station. Say nothing. If anyone asks where I am, tell them you don't know." "Yes, sir." As Nolan hurried off, Adrian adjusted his cufflinks, an old habit before confronting someone. Every instinct told him this wasn't just about Malik's boarding pass. It was something deeper, something orchestrated. And if Draylen was reckless enough to tamper with an executive's family, then he wasn't acting alone. When he reached the door to conference room 3, he stopped and listened. He could make out 2 voices, Draylen's clipped, nervous tone and Vaughn's low, deliberate responses. He waited, memorizing their words, piecing together fragments about review protocols, pilot exemptions, and system reassignments. It wasn't about security, it was about control. Adrian's hand hovered near the door handle, but he didn't enter yet. He wanted to hear more, to understand what kind of power play was unfolding beneath his company's polished surface. Then, faintly, through the glass, he caught his own name. "Adrian Cole doesn't suspect a thing," Draylen said. Vaughn's reply came calmly. "He will soon enough." Adrian's pulse remained steady, but his expression hardened. He stepped back silently, his mind already forming a plan. If they thought he was walking into a trap, he'd turn it into theirs. He glanced down the hall once more, his jaw set. There were eyes on him. He could feel it. Cameras, observers, hidden watchers who wanted to see how far he'd go. But Adrian Cole wasn't the kind of man to retreat. He walked forward, pushing the door open just enough for the 2 men inside to freeze mid-sentence. The look on their faces confirmed everything he needed to know. Without breaking eye contact, Adrian closed the door behind him and said in a calm, controlled voice, "Let's talk about Flight 108. Outside, Malik sat anxiously in the waiting area, unaware that his father's discovery was about to shake the entire foundation of Skyward Airlines. Several people nearby whispered as security men subtly took positions around the boarding zone. The tension was no longer invisible. It was alive, rippling through every corner of the terminal. And as Adrian faced the men responsible for sabotaging his son's dignity, neither he nor Malik realized that this confrontation was only the beginning of something far greater, a battle not just for justice, but for truth buried deep within the company's systems. But for now, Malik could only watch the door where his father had vanished and hope he came back unscathed. Then he walks toward the restricted area, unaware that several eyes are already watching his every move. Inside the operations wing, Adrian found Martin Draylen standing by a row of shelves, his posture tense, his shirt clinging to his back with sweat. The man looked like someone who had already packed his guilt away. Half-filled boxes lined the floor, files stacked hastily inside them, cables dangling from disconnected computers. The faint hum of the air conditioning did little to cool the tension in the air. Adrian stepped inside, the sound of his shoes echoing against the sterile tile. "Leaving early?" His tone was steady, measured, but it carried the weight of command. Draylen jumped at the voice, nearly dropping the folder in his hand. He turned sharply, eyes wide. "Sir, You were just tampering with executive travel records," Adrian cut in, his voice low but precise. Each word hit like a blade being drawn across glass. Draylen's face flushed, then drained pale. He set the folder down slowly, fingers trembling. "It wasn't personal," he blurted, words spilling out faster than his mind could shape them. They told me to do it. Adrian's gaze didn't waver. He took a single step forward, his presence closing the distance more effectively than any threat could. Who's they? Draylen hesitated. His throat bobbed as he glanced up toward the corner of the ceiling, where a small red light blinked from the security camera. His voice dropped to a near whisper. You think you're running Aurora Sky, he said, but someone else has been pulling the strings for months. The words hung in the air. Adrian's expression didn't change, but behind his calm eyes, thoughts raced. The company, his company, had already survived 2 acquisition attempts, both from competitors disguised through shell investors. He had suspected outside pressure, but this was internal. Meaning? Adrian asked quietly, stepping closer until the desk separated them by only a few feet. Draylen glanced toward the door, as though expecting someone to walk in. Board members, he whispered. 3 of them. They wanted you embarrassed. Said if your son's experience made headlines, shareholders would question your leadership. Adrian's silence grew heavier than anger. His expression remained composed, but there was a fire behind it, one that came from betrayal, not pride. He had spent years building Aurora Sky into a symbol of trust, turning the airline's image from scandal to reliability. To use his own son as a weapon against him, that was a move beyond business. That was personal warfare. He took another step forward. You helped them try to humiliate my child, Adrian said, his voice so calm it was frightening. To weaken me publicly? Draylen swallowed hard, his breathing shallow. They said you'd recover, sir. They just needed leverage for the merger vote next quarter. It wasn't supposed to go this far. They only... Adrian raised a hand, and Draylen stopped mid-sentence. The CEO turned his head slightly, looking straight at the camera in the corner. His eyes locked on the lens for a beat before turning back to the trembling man. You've just admitted to conspiracy, he said evenly, on record. Draylen froze, realizing the magnitude of what had just happened. His face turned ghostly white. Sir, please, I didn't mean... You'll tell the board yourself, Adrian interrupted coldly. He stepped past Draylen, his shoulders squared, his steps measured. Each motion was deliberate, controlled. Behind him, Draylen sank into a chair, muttering half-formed words, the sound of defeat echoing off the sterile walls. Adrian walked toward the door but stopped just before leaving. He turned slightly, not looking back but letting his words hang in the air like a closing statement. I built this company on integrity. You traded yours for convenience. Then he pushed open the door. The hallway outside was quieter than before. A pair of security officers walked past, giving curt nods as they continued down the corridor. The low hum of distant engines from the tarmac bled faintly through the walls, grounding the space in an eerie stillness. Adrian's phone buzzed in his pocket. He reached for it absently, expecting a message from Pierce confirming that Malik was waiting. Instead, what he saw made him stop mid-step. Dad, security just told me you're under investigation. They're coming for you. The words seemed to freeze him in place. His thumb hovered over the screen as he reread the message, each letter hitting harder than the last. The fluorescent light above flickered once, breaking the stillness like a warning. Adrian's instincts shifted from fury to focus. Someone had moved faster than expected. The same board members who'd used Draylen as a pawn were now shifting blame, turning the investigation on him before he could expose them. It was a classic corporate maneuver. Frame the leader before he reveals the truth. He slid the phone back into his pocket, his expression unreadable. To any passing staff member, he looked calm, even detached. But inside, his mind was already building a response. There was no time for hesitation. At the far end of the hallway, Pierce appeared, breathless and wide-eyed. Sir? I know, Adrian said, cutting him off before the words could come. Who's moving it? Pierce hesitated. Compliance and 2 men from legal affairs. They came in with external authorization. I think the board triggered an audit request. Of course they did, Adrian murmured. He straightened his tie, his tone measured again. Get Malik off the concourse, now. Keep him somewhere visible, but secure. No one from management is to approach him. Pierce nodded. And you, sir? Adrian started walking again, his pace steady. I'll give them their audit. Pierce followed a step behind. "Sir, this could be a setup." "It already is." They rounded the corner where the glass wall overlooked the hangar. Below, aircraft stood lined in perfect symmetry, the night crew moving like shadows under the floodlights. The view always reminded Adrian why he'd fought to save the company, because Aurora Sky wasn't about power. It was about purpose, about trust, and now that trust was being dismantled from the inside. They reached the elevators, but before Adrian could press the button, the doors opened on their own. Two men in black suits stepped out. Their badges were clipped to their pockets, though the logos were small enough to be unreadable. "Mr. Cole," the taller one said with forced politeness, "we've been instructed to bring you in for immediate inquiry." "Standard procedure." Adrian's gaze flicked briefly to Pierce, then back to the men. "Standard procedure usually involves notice." The man smiled tightly. "Special circumstances." For a moment, neither moved. The air between them was charged, like static before lightning. Then Adrian stepped forward. "Lead the way." As they walked, Pierce lingered behind, pulling out his phone to send a discreet message. One Adrian had trained him for years to send in emergencies. It went to one person only, Malik. But Adrian didn't look back. His expression was calm, but his thoughts were razor-sharp. Every step he took toward that conference chamber was both a trap and a test. He knew the game now. It wasn't about what he could prove. It was about how fast he could turn the narrative before it consumed him. Inside the conference hall, the lights were low, screens glowing with legal text. Three figures sat at the far end of the long table, faces he recognized instantly. Board members, the very ones Draylen had named. "Mr. Cole," one of them said smoothly, folding his hands. "Please, have a seat." Adrian remained standing. "You called for an investigation." "Against me." "We received troubling reports about your conduct," another said, feigning concern. "Manipulating flight records, authorizing internal surveillance. It appears there's been overreach." The irony almost made him smile. "Overreach?" he echoed. "I'd call it oversight." The man at the center leaned back. "Regardless, you'll need to answer for the irregularities. Until the review is complete, your executive privileges are temporarily suspended." Pierce stepped in from the hall, voice trembling slightly. "Sir, your son, he's asking if you're all right." Adrian looked at the board members, then at Pierce. "Tell him I'm fine," he said quietly. And though his tone remained calm, something behind his eyes had changed. An unspoken resolve. The kind that came when a man realized he was no longer playing defense. He walked closer to the table, leaning slightly forward. "You may think you've cornered me," he said, his voice carrying across the silent room, "but you've only exposed yourselves." The board members exchanged glances, unease flickering behind their polished composure. Then Adrian turned, his phone vibrating again in his pocket. He glanced down, Malik's message still glowing on the screen. "Dad, security just told me you're under investigation. They're coming for you." And this time, Adrian allowed himself a small, knowing breath. Then he leaves, his phone buzzing with a new message, one that makes him stop mid-step. It's from Malik. "Dad, security just told me you're under investigation. They're coming for you." The new gate agents had stopped pretending to work. They stood in a stiff semicircle behind the counter, whispering to one another while their eyes darted toward Malik. The teenager sat quietly on a bench by gate 47, his backpack still at his feet, his ticket stub folded in his hand where the first gate agent had torn it earlier that day. The terminal's air hummed with nervous tension, the kind that comes before something breaks. A few passengers glanced up from their phones, sensing that whatever had begun hours ago wasn't over yet. Malik noticed two men in dark suits walking down the corridor, their polished shoes clicking evenly against the tile. They weren't security guards. Their stride was too deliberate, their suits too well tailored. "Mr. Torrance," one of them said as they stopped in front of Malik. His voice was polite but distant. "We need you to come with us for questioning." Malik slowly stood, his pulse quickening. The man's badge gleamed under the overhead lights, stamped with the Aurora Sky insignia. Behind him, Pierce, still dressed in his ground operations jacket, moved closer, his jaw tightening. "Questioning?" Malik repeated. "About what?" The second man, taller and more rigid, held up a printed document. By order of corporate operations, you're required to accompany us to a secure area for internal review. Pierce snatched the paper before Malik could react. His eyes scanned it quickly, his brow furrowing deeper with each line. By whose authority? He demanded. The taller officer spoke flatly, as though rehearsed. Dr. Adrian Torrance, CEO of Aurora Sky. At that name, Malik's expression froze. For a heartbeat, everything around him seemed to slow, the murmurs, the footsteps, even the faint mechanical whir of the baggage belt. He reached for the document, taking it from Pierce's trembling hand. The moment his eyes landed on the signature, he knew. The stroke was wrong, the ink too faint. His father's real signature had a firm tail, written with the same fountain pen he carried everywhere. This one looked scanned, synthetic. Malik looked up, his voice steady but quiet. That's forged. The men exchanged a glance, as if recalibrating. Sir, one began, if you resist, we'll have to... You'll have to what? Pierce interrupted, stepping forward, broad shoulders blocking Malik from view. His tone was low but sharp, the kind that carried a warning. Drag a teenager off a gate in front of 100 witnesses? The first man's expression twitched. This doesn't concern you, Mr. Reed. Pierce's nostrils flared. It does now. Passengers had started to notice. Cameras lifted. Whispers spread. Someone began recording. Malik felt the pressure building, 1,000 eyes pressing against his skin. He took a breath, opened his phone, and switched to video mode. If you're taking me, he said clearly, turning the camera toward the suited men, the world's going to see who you're working for. The taller officer stiffened. Turn that off. But Malik didn't. The live stream counter blinked. 12 viewers, 48, 139, 2,000. Comments poured in. Questions, shock, disbelief. The hashtags began forming right before his eyes. Number 47 incident and Aurora Sky scandal. Pierce leaned close, whispering urgently, Malik, this is getting big, really big. We need to find your father now. I know, Malik whispered back. His fingers trembled slightly as he kept the camera steady. Behind the two officers, the head agent from earlier, the one who had ripped his boarding pass, had vanished from the counter. Malik didn't need to guess why. Then the air shifted. The giant monitors above the gate flickered once, then again, before the usual flight information dissolved into static. Gasps spread through the crowd. Pierce's head snapped upward. What the? Every screen in the terminal suddenly switched to the same feed. The Aurora Sky CEO's office came into view, its glass walls and skyline backdrop unmistakable. Adrian Torrance sat at his desk, his expression unreadable, his gaze fixed forward like a man who had seen enough. Then his voice filled the terminal speakers, calm but commanding. Attention, passengers and staff, he began. This system breach is being traced as we speak. Anyone attempting to interfere with my family or cover up this misconduct will be held fully accountable. The officers froze mid-step. The forged order in the taller man's hand flickered, its digital watermark pulsing red, before vanishing from the internal system. On Malik's phone screen, the comments exploded with excitement and relief. He's live, one user typed. That's the CEO himself, another wrote. Wait, did he say his family? A third comment scrolled by. Malik's throat tightened. His father's tone wasn't angry. It was final, precise. That tone meant he already knew everything. Somewhere deep inside Aurora Sky's internal systems, someone had tried to bury the truth. And Adrian Torrance had just dug it out for everyone to see. The officers exchanged a panicked look. Cut the feed, one muttered, pressing a small earpiece. But the command was useless. Adrian's image remained steady, voice echoing across the concourse. Effective immediately, Adrian continued, security personnel are to detain anyone presenting unauthorized orders or attempting to detain passengers under false pretenses. Behind Malik, the airport's actual security guards, blue uniforms, not suits, stepped forward, alerted by the announcement. The two corporate officers slowly raised their hands, realizing their authority had just evaporated in front of hundreds of witnesses. Pierce's shoulders relaxed, though his hand still hovered near Malik's back protectively. The teenager lowered his phone slightly, still recording but no longer trembling. The live stream comments now overflowed with celebration. confusion, and gratitude. "Is that really his dad?" one person typed. "This kid just exposed a whole corporate setup," another posted. "History being made live," someone else wrote. Malik turned the camera to face himself briefly, the weight of adrenaline beginning to settle into disbelief. "You all saw it," he said quietly. "You saw what they tried to do?" Pierce placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "It's over, Malik." But Malik shook his head slightly. "No," he murmured. "It's just starting." He looked around, the guards escorting the imposters away, passengers murmuring, phones raised high like digital torches. His gaze drifted to the monitors one last time. His father was still on screen, now speaking directly to someone off camera, his tone crisp, efficient. "He's already tracing them," Pierce whispered, following Malik's eyes. A small smile touched Malik's lips. The tension that had knotted his chest for hours finally began to unwind. He knew that look in his father's eyes, the same look he had when solving problems most people couldn't even name. The officer's forged order had vanished. The false authority had crumbled, and in its place, something bigger was starting to emerge, a reckoning that stretched beyond Gate 47. As the feed finally cut to black, silence rippled through the terminal before applause broke out, hesitant at first, then growing louder. Malik exhaled deeply, the sound halfway between relief and exhaustion. Pierce gave his shoulder a firm pat, pride flickering behind his tired eyes. "Guess he found them," Malik said, voice quiet but certain. Pierce nodded once, a knowing smile crossing his face. "He's not done yet." By the next morning, the scandal had burst into full daylight. Every major news network carried the story, headlines flashing across screens in airports, cafes, and corporate towers. "Aurora Sky CEO intervenes in gate incident," one read. Another declared, "Forged order exposed. Board members resign amid investigation." The footage of Malik's live stream played in endless loops, his calm defiance, the forged order vanishing, and his father's commanding broadcast freezing the entire terminal. What had begun as a humiliation had turned into a reckoning for an entire company. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores themes of racial prejudice, the abuse of workplace authority, and the severe consequences of arrogance and professional misconduct. This narrative aims to highlight the importance of dignity and accountability, showing that vicious disrespect can lead to instant, high-level corporate repercussions.